Dear viewers, the following stories are inspired by real events. However, the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story 1. Shadow at Dawn. It was a hot summer morning in 2013. In a quiet residential area in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. We will call the main character Michael Davis. Michael, a man in his 40s, had a habit of walking for exercise every morning before going to work. He liked the quiet and fresh air of dawn. At exactly 4 a.m., Michael woke up, put on his sportswear and quietly left the house so as not to disturb his wife and children. He began walking on the familiar path around the neighborhood. At this time, it was still dark. Only a few street lights cast a yellow light on the sidewalk. After Michael had walked for about 10 minutes, he suddenly felt something was different. The neighborhood was quieter than usual today. There was no bird chirping or the sound of passing vehicles. Only the sound of his footsteps echoed in the quiet space. Michael passed by a small park, which was usually full of people walking their dogs in the morning. But today, the park was completely deserted. He felt a little confused, but continued walking. As Michael turned into a deserted street, he suddenly saw a figure standing under a large tree in the distance. The figure was tall and thin, standing still like a statue, not moving at all. Michael squinted to see better, but the darkness still covered everything. Michael felt a little uneasy, but he thought that maybe it was just another pedestrian taking a break. He continued walking forward, but as he got closer, he realized that the figure did not look like a normal person. It stood straight, not at all like it was resting. When Michael was only about 20 meters away from the figure, it suddenly turned around. In the dim light of the street lamp, Michael was horrified to realize that the figure had no face. Where a face should have been, there was only a dark, terrifying void. Michael stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a terrible fear invade his body. He wanted to run, but his legs seemed frozen in place. The faceless figure was still standing there, staring at him with a black void on its face. Suddenly, the figure raised a long, thin arm toward Michael. He could clearly see its bony fingers trembling. A cold, creepy feeling spread through Michael's body. He knew he was facing something that did not belong to this world. What could he do to escape this terrifying situation? Michael stood frozen, unable to believe what he had just seen. A tall, faceless figure, standing right in front of him in the quiet dawn. Paralyzing fear left him unable to move, unable to speak. The faceless figure slowly raised its arm towards Michael. Its long, thin fingers trembled slightly, as if it wanted to touch him. Michael felt a cold breeze blow against his face, carrying a foul stench. Instinctively, Michael took a step back. He tried to calm himself down and think of a reasonable explanation for what he was seeing. Maybe it was just someone's cruel joke? But the figure's appearance and terrifying silence made him unable to believe it. The faceless figure began to move towards Michael. It moved slowly, but each of its steps seemed to echo in Michael's head, creating a heavy and oppressive feeling. Michael felt his heart pounding, and cold sweat broke out on his back. When the figure was only a few meters away from Michael, he finally found his voice. Who are you? What do you want? Michael's voice trembled, filled with fear. The faceless figure did not reply. It only continued to advance towards him, the black void of its face seemingly sucking in the surrounding light. Michael knew he had to run. He turned and ran, not daring to look back. He ran down the empty street, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. He could feel the terrifying presence of the faceless figure, still chasing after him. Michael ran until he reached his house. He quickly opened the door, rushed inside and locked the door. He leaned against the door, panting and trying to calm himself. He looked out the window, but the faceless figure was gone. However, Michael still felt an extreme sense of unease and fear. He knew that what he had just experienced was not a dream. He had seen something inexplicable, something terrifying that existed in his peaceful neighborhood. From that night on, Michael never dared to go jogging at 4 a.m. again. He always felt like someone was watching him in the dark, and the faceless figure still haunted his dreams. Years later, Michael still couldn't forget that terrifying encounter. He told his story to many people, but no one believed him. They thought he was just hallucinating due to lack of sleep. But Michael knew clearly that what he saw was real. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he still felt a cold chill run down his spine, as if the faceless figure was somewhere nearby, still watching him in the dark. The story of Michael Davis and the faceless figure at dawn is a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are hidden in the most familiar places. The darkness always hides mysteries that we never want to explore. Story 2. Knock at Dawn. It was a cold winter morning in 2018. In a quiet residential area in Scottsdale, Arizona. We will call the main character Sarah Johnson. Sarah, a woman in her 30s, worked from home and usually woke up very early to enjoy the quiet before her family woke up. That day, she decided to go for a walk earlier than usual. At exactly 3:30 a.m., Sarah quietly got out of bed, dressed warmly, and left the house. The cold air made her shiver, but the absolute silence of the early morning gave her a strange sense of peace. She began walking on the familiar cobblestone street in the neighborhood. At this time, all the surrounding houses were in darkness, with only a few dim lights coming from a few street lamps. Sarah felt like she was the only one awake in the entire neighborhood. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet space. As Sarah passed a house at the end of the street, she heard a small noise coming from inside. It was a soft click, as if someone had just closed a door. Sarah was a little startled, but she thought it was probably just the wind. She continued walking, but the uneasy feeling did not leave her. As she passed another block of houses, Sarah heard the same noises again. This time, it was a soft click, as if someone was walking very quietly inside the house. Sarah began to feel nervous. The neighborhood was usually very quiet in the early morning, and these noises were completely unusual. She looked around, trying to determine if anyone else was walking, but saw no one. As Sarah reached the quietest part of the neighborhood, where there were tall, dense trees on both sides, she heard a very strange noise. It was a soft knock, but it echoed strangely in the stillness of the early morning. The knock seemed to come from an abandoned house across the street. Sarah paused, her heart beating faster. The abandoned house had been empty for years, and she had never heard any noise from it before. She felt a mixture of curiosity and fear. Suddenly, the knocking came again, this time clearer and more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. The sound reached Sarah's ears, sending a chill down her spine. She stared at the abandoned house, trying to see through the dark windows. She felt like something was there, waiting for her, and she knew that the quiet of the early morning had been broken by something very scary. Sarah stood rooted to the spot in the middle of the empty street, the soft but haunting knocking still echoing in her ears. Knock, knock, knock. It repeated, steady and incessant, like a cold invitation from the darkness. Sarah felt a strange urge. A terrifying desire to know what was making that sound. Despite her fear, Sarah slowly walked towards the abandoned house. The house looked old and dilapidated. The wooden boards peeling, the windows broken, and vines covering the walls. It had a gloomy and cold aura, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. As Sarah got closer, the knocking seemed to become clearer. Coming from the front door of the house, she could hear the soft, yet determined sound of wood hitting wood. Sarah stopped at the gate, staring at the rotten wooden door. "Is anyone there?" Sarah called softly, her voice trembling. There was no answer. Only the knocking continued, steady and incessant. Sarah felt a sense of unease rising within her. She knew she shouldn't have gone near this house, but some invisible force seemed to be holding her back. Sarah decided to walk around to the back of the house, hoping to see something through the broken windows. As she walked along the grassy path beside the house, she heard another noise coming from inside. It was a soft whisper, like someone talking to themselves. Sarah stopped, listening closely. The whisper was small, indistinct, but she could still hear the sadness and pain in the sound. She felt a strange sympathy for the person inside this abandoned house. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, and the knocking came again, this time louder and more urgent. Knock, 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 knock. It was like a desperate cry for help, and Sarah couldn't ignore it. She decided to see what was going on. Sarah tiptoed to the front door, placing her hand on the cold, rusty doorknob. She took a deep breath, then slowly pushed the door open. A cold wind blew in her face, carrying a musty, fishy smell. The house was dark, and it was impossible to see anything clearly. "Is anyone there?" Sarah called again, her voice louder this time. There was still no answer. But just as she was about to step inside, a knock sounded behind her, so loud that she jerked her head around. Before Sarah's eyes, the door she had just opened slammed shut, and she heard a cold, cackling laugh echo through the stillness of the dawn. Sarah knew that she had awakened something dark and terrifying. She ran away, never daring to look back at that abandoned house again. The story of Sarah and the knock at dawn is a warning that sometimes curiosity can lead us to places we should never go. The sounds in the dark can hide terrifying secrets that are best left in the dark forever. Story 3. Breathing in the dark. It was a chilly spring morning in 2021. In a quiet residential area in Boulder, Colorado. We will call the main character Emily Carter. Emily, a woman in her 50s, is very health conscious and has a habit of going for a brisk walk every morning, usually starting around 5 a.m. At exactly 5 a.m., the alarm on Emily's phone rang. She quickly turned it off, put on her sports clothes and went downstairs. She didn't want to disturb her husband who was still sleeping. Emily opened the front door and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. As Emily began walking down the familiar sidewalk, she felt a silence envelop the neighborhood. The sun had not yet risen, and the surrounding houses were still in darkness. Only the rhythmic sound of her footsteps broke the silence. Emily walked down a tree-lined street that was usually filled with squirrels in the morning. But today, she did not see any animals. The strangely quiet feeling made Emily shiver slightly. As Emily turned onto a deserted street, she suddenly heard a strange sound. It was a soft breathing sound, as if someone was breathing right behind her. Emily turned around in surprise, but saw no one. She thought she must have heard wrong. She continued walking, but the breathing sound came again, this time clearer and closer. Emily felt her heart beat faster. She stopped and listened carefully. The breathing was still there, steady and cold, as if an invisible presence was following her. Emily started walking faster, trying to leave the terrifying sound behind. But the breathing seemed to follow her, never fading away. She felt an intense fear spread throughout her body. She didn't know what was following her, and what it wanted. As Emily neared her house, she suddenly heard the breathing become more rapid and labored, as if the person following her was trying to catch up with her. She could feel the cold air on the back of her neck. Emily ran towards the house as fast as she could, trying to open the door as quickly as possible. Emily finally opened the door and rushed inside, slamming it shut and locking it. She leaned against the door, panting and listening. The terrifying breathing seemed to have stopped, but Emily still couldn't rest easy. She knew that she had encountered something very dark and scary in that quiet early morning, and she wasn't sure that it had really gone. Emily leaned against the door, breathing heavily, trying to calm herself. She listened, but no longer heard the terrifying breathing. However, the feeling of unease still enveloped her. She couldn't believe that it had completely disappeared. Emily stepped into the living room, trying not to make a sound. She looked around. Everything was normal. The dim light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the window. She told herself that maybe she was worrying too much. Maybe it was just some animal. But as Emily walked down the hallway to go upstairs, she suddenly heard a very faint sound coming from her daughter's bedroom. It was a small click, like someone had just closed the door. Emily stopped. Her heart started to beat faster again. Her daughter was still sleeping soundly. There was no way she could have woken up so early. Emily tiptoed to her daughter's door, gently opening it. The room was dark. The curtains were still closed. She called softly, "Sarah? Are you awake?" There was no answer. Emily gently pushed the door open and entered. She felt a cold air blowing on her face. As Emily's eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, she was horrified to realize that there was a figure standing in the corner of the room, next to her daughter's bed. The figure was tall and thin, standing silently, not moving at all. Emily couldn't see the face clearly, but she felt a terrifying presence emanating from the figure. "Who is it? Who are you? What do you want?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The figure remained silent. Suddenly, it slowly turned its head towards Emily. In the darkness, she could clearly see its eyes staring at her, red eyes glowing like two coals. Emily screamed in horror and backed away. The figure began to move towards her, moving slowly but menacingly. Emily felt completely helpless, unable to run away, unable to call for help. When the figure was only a few steps away from Emily, a loud noise rang out from her and her husband's bedroom. It was the sound of her husband, David, screaming in pain. Emily turned around in shock. And in that moment, the figure in her daughter's room disappeared. Emily hurriedly ran to her bedroom. She found David sitting up in bed, looking terrified. He said he had just felt a cold hand on his neck. Both husband and wife knew that what Emily had encountered on the road was more than a hallucination. It had followed her home, and now it was haunting their entire family. That early morning walk had brought a horror they would never forget. The story of Emily Carter and the breathing in the dark is a reminder that sometimes the scariest things invade our ordinary lives unexpectedly and cruelly. The darkness always hides secrets that we cannot foresee. If you find this story creepy and want to hear more similar stories, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for listening.